You're listening to the Table Talk podcast, brought to you by the team at Food Matters. Hello and welcome to the Table Talk podcast, where we explore a huge range of crucial issues and exciting developments in the food industry with brilliant guests drawn from all areas of expertise. Now, I'm Stefan Gates. I'm a TV presenter and writer, and I specialise in food and science. This podcast is all about tackling the skills shortage in the food and drink industry. In the past few weeks, the resilience of the food and drink industry has affected people everywhere, and people working across the industry and around the globe are rightly recognised as the hidden heroes in the battle against COVID-19, amongst other heroes, obviously. But the industry is facing a huge skills shortage, with an estimated 140,000 new recruits needed in food manufacturing alone by 2024, according to the UK's Food and Drink Federation. So what can we do to get more of these hidden heroes working in the industry, and why are they not interested at the moment? Here to discuss this with me are Moira Stalker, Skills Manager at the Food and Drink Federation Scotland.
Hello.
Rosina Borelli, Workplace Engagement Lead for IFSTAL, Interdisciplinary Food Systems Teaching and Learning.
Hello.
And Emma Weston, Associate Professor in Food Sciences at the University of Nottingham.
Hello.
So, Moira, if we can just start with you, can you give us an overview of the food industry? I mean, how big is it and why is it so important to the country?
Well, the food industry in the UK is the largest manufacturing sector, so it's hugely important. Also, it supplies our nation with the food that we want to eat and drink every day. It's massively important. It also requires a great deal of innovation and huge amount of skilled individuals working in it as well. But I think we're going to touch on that later on in the discussion. It's not always recognised how highly scientific and how technical our industry is. So it's got a bit of an image problem there as well, but it's massively important. And I think COVID-19 has really highlighted just how important the food and drink industry is.
It's thrown a massive focus on it, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge. And I think food has never seemed so important to people. So having this discussion about how we can make the industry more attractive, get more skilled people to come and work in the industry and really appreciate where our food comes from, how it gets there, and the people that are involved in that whole process is massively important, because it's such a crucial industry, and economically it contributes so much to the economy of the UK.
Okay, Rosina, what is the state of employment in the food industry? Let's just dive straight in there. Is there dismay or despair in the food industry at its appeal to graduates and new employees?
It's a really interesting question, actually, because I work as a sort of in a bridge role between our partner universities on the programme and the sector in general. So it's not just industry, but also areas such as government and UN agencies. What's interesting is the types of individuals that industry want to bring in now. And they're looking for specialists, for example, in climate change, but also the impact that that has on food. And they're struggling to really get into the, let's say, talent pathways that are well entrenched within universities, for example. So there are some obvious routes within universities to get individuals into industries, for example, toxicologists or food scientists, and some, for example, veterinary scientists who have well-trodden paths into particular food organisations. Research and development, for example, in Unilever, is a good example. MBA students going into these large corporations like Nestle. But those new skills that are required, as I said, for example, understanding the entire food system, understanding the nuance that's now required within food, it's much more difficult for organisations to dip into environmental science, or those doing biology, for example, specifically, or even bringing in those that might have done agriculture, but into a slightly different setting. So I suppose those original pathways that and those relationships that have been built up over many years are now outdated and need to be refreshed in order to create those talent pathways anew.
So basically the idea that you used to go and see the careers advisor and they'd say, you can either do this or you can do that, and then this way, that doesn't exist anymore. We're talking about attracting people. But so Emma, why is there a shortfall? Why isn't the industry attracting young people?
I think it's largely due to image from all the way across the whole of the the marketplace, whether it be from the school perception as a student, taking science A levels or not. It's the parents' perception of whether it's what is now proven to be a worthwhile and robust career. And also the career services in schools are different nowadays. Academies don't have a central service to get their information from, so we can't send information out in a robust way that people can use throughout schools. So I think image has a huge amount of part to play. I think TV helps in some cases, and in some cases it doesn't, because a lot of the footage you see on TV has got great information on equipment, but the people doing the jobs tend to be fairly basic, and that's not really displaying the sort of the variety of the superb careers and well-paid careers that you could take on in the food industry rather than just working on a production line. And I think that is where it's going from, and I think Rosina is right. What people are looking for now are people who want to engage in the modern world, and sustainability is a massive part of how we're going to have to make great food from tough ingredients, and healthy and nutritious food. So we're not getting people coming through to do the courses, to do the degrees, because they're not seeing how exciting a career it can be. And I worked in the food industry before as an academic, and as an employer, I would say it's a fantastic, and as a worker myself, fantastic career in technical management, and you could really do some fantastic things, but it's just not seen as something that parents will necessarily direct their children to when they're going to UCAS visit days or open days. They're looking at law, they're looking at biochemistry, they're looking at medicine, and not everyone wants to be a vet with biology, chemistry, maths.
Yeah, I do think though, there's just building on that image problem, but it's also the articulation of those roles. So, for example, I won't use any names, but we've been working with a particular retailer.
Go on, get in there.
We've been working in a positive way. We've been working with a particular retailer in shaping postgraduate graduate opportunities. So, for example, 1 year fixed-term contracts in quite complex projects, for example, in sustainability, as Emma says, or in food safety, or in how to change their labelling structure across the entire business. So they want skilled people that maybe have had some experience in a part of the industry, have gone back to do a master's or a PhD, and now have a selection of skills. But actually, what has been the challenge is translating from, say, the business management level, what those skills look like in that recruitment process. So how do you articulate those skills? Where do you advertise for those roles? Because as Emma said, there's sort of swathes of types of roles within the industry, and they're advertised in quite specific places. But these sort of interdisciplinary skills and roles, they don't really have a position out there in the market. Yes, exactly. It's very difficult to define, and even the HR and the recruitment teams found it very difficult to position those particular adverts.
I would like to agree with what Emma and Rosina have said as well, but also I think it's really hard for young people and their parents and teachers as well to understand what the careers are in the food and drink industry. I always veer away from saying jobs because it offers career opportunities. It's really hard to define to young people the kind of careers that they could have in the food and drink industry. Yeah. And also,
okay, but Rosina, I'm sorry, Moira, does this have anything to do you think, with the perception of the food industry as being dominated by big, nasty, profiteering companies bleeding the planet dry, when frankly, it's a much sexier bet to go and work in a funky office in Shoreditch with decent coffee?
Yeah, I think there is an element of that. It's not seen as, I hate using this word as well, but sexy.
But I think it's important. That's you've got it spot on. That why isn't the food industry sexy? Why is that?
We need a role model. I don't know. We need a sort of figurehead to actually demonstrate this is an exciting career. Look, I made these products. They ended up in the supermarket shelves. I've always wanted to find the person that made Percy Pigs, because I think if we could get the Percy Pig manufacturer on and say, look, I built my career on Percy Pigs, it's something so visual and realistic. Because I think one of the problems, maybe not so much now because I think times are changing, we take food and drink so for granted. We expect every day to go into a supermarket or a shop or buy the food that we want when we want, and we don't ever anticipate that it's going to do us harm. And the reason we do that is because it's such a good industry and it's so responsible, and it does make food that's good for you, but we don't think about it, and there's a disconnect.
It's doing its job too well.
I think Moira's made a really good point there. I mean, for food science, for example, we spend a huge amount of our training with our students, making sure that they underpin everything that makes food something you can buy and eat. And that's in terms of the fact that it's not going to harm you, obviously, but also if you buy a particular branded product, that it tastes exactly the same every single time. And there's huge amounts of people needed to be employed to do that. And yes, there are people in product development, of course there are, and that's a massive part of the growth area in sensory science as well. But we really have got this whole breadth. I mean, there's 14 different roles for food science graduates that we developed in a framework, and absolutely, if we could put all those together in something which is, I think perhaps the message is so hard because there are so many options. It's almost like saying, tell me about all the different careers there are within the healthcare sector. There are millions, but they're not just nurses, they're not just doctors. So, and I think because, and also I feel it's very hard to emulate a day in the life, perhaps, of people within the food industry, because a lot of what makes us happy when we're working in the industry is the fact that it's so variable, there's so much going on, so much people interaction, so many decisions have to be made. And it's in some respects triage, that actually your day goes so fast, and you're paid well for it. And this is why it's quite hard for us to get that across. And actually, having been in the industry, the idea of sitting in a sexy office in London drinking very expensive coffee sounds remarkably dull.
Okay, so Rosina, let's just get down to absolute basics here. Is this not about money? I mean, if the food industry offered a big enough salary, and I know that there are loads of other things important to everyone, wouldn't that draw enough people?
Well, it's an interesting one actually, because part of our role on the IFSTAL programme is to, as I say, is connect individuals with opportunities. And this time last year, I was looking at the Times booklet that they produce on graduate salaries, and Aldi and Lidl are offering a huge amount of money to go into their organisations on a graduate programme. I mean, big money. And I'm not sure that the money thing is the issue often. I think many people are passionate about food, and people are also very passionate about brands and want to go and work for large organisations, whether that's, you know, your Tesco's or your Sainsbury's, but it might also be those bit further down, you know, behind those retailers in the rest of the supply chain. And yes, money obviously is a factor, but everybody that I know and that I've worked with is passionate about food. They're the ones who want to get into the industry. There are many others that have come in through different routes and then think, oh my goodness, why didn't I do this first off? But the thing that really brings our cohort together and our ongoing community of practice is actually the passion of the sector, the passion of food itself, but also changing that sector, and that's quite interesting, that those drivers.
So at the moment, I think if you sit next to somebody at dinner and they say, you know, where do you work, and you reply, I work in the food industry, there is a negative perception. It's people revert to this idea about big business that has been bad for the planet, in various different ways. That's a massive oversimplification, obviously.
I don't necessarily think it's that. I think they don't understand what the industry actually does, because the minute you tend to mention food and drink, they go down the catering and hospitality route.
Yeah.
Or they think you're a good cook.
Yeah. Yes. They think you're and, you know, that's it's great to have that interest, but that's not what it's about. So I spend a vast majority of my time when I'm either talking to people about the industry or when people ask me what I do, explaining what I mean when I'm talking about food and drink manufacturing.
Yeah.
And you can tell that and then I think one of the other issues that we have as well, we're always referring to as manufacturing, which is not seen necessarily as being an area that people want to work in, because it's got the kind of industrial connotations, which I think is fabulous.
Yeah, me too. I think, wow, how brilliant would that be?
But not
yes, that's not the perception.
Yeah, but it's not. And young people, they don't actually necessarily understand. When we're talking about manufacturing, it's a slightly alien concept to them, because they're so far removed from maybe when we were younger and manufacturing had more of priority. So their perception of it is completely different maybe to what, when we're talking about it, what we're thinking. So we maybe need to change some of the language we use when we're talking about it, and make it more interesting, and make it and be more consistent as well when we're talking about it.
Now, Emma, we've seen the A level in food technology disappear. There is a GCSE still. I mean, I have to say, it's relatively rare to find it in schools, and I presume there's a reason for that. And I assume that people aren't getting inspired enough to take it. Do you think that sort of groundwork here is about education and just getting people more interested in food right from the start of their lives?
Yeah, and I think it's about, I mean, one could argue, and we could talk philosophically always about the inspiration people get from home and cooking at home and other types of things. But fundamentally, a lot of what I would class as the more non-baccalaureate related GCSEs are dwindling, and that includes design technology, and also includes, food and nutrition, the GCSE. So those things are dwindling. Obviously, the food tech has now stopped being an A level for pretty much everyone now from last year. And there is an alternative, but no one is really taking up on that one. We've lost quite a few people entering higher education under the food science or other associated biosciences routes because they're just not getting that education within their own curriculum. So yes, it is creating an impact. We're trying to target science, and we're trying to target biology and chemistry and physics, and explain about the multidisciplinary nature of being in a technical role in the food industry, because it's not just chemistry, it's not just biology, it's not just physics, it's not just maths, it's all of them. We are trying that, but it's very hard to get that outreach in there. But I do, for good or ill, and food technology had its downfalls as well as its positive points. It did create that message, and people would then take another A level with it, and then maybe take on some further and higher education. So yes, it has had an impact.
Yeah. Out of interest, a lot is said about the skills shortage, that there aren't enough recruits. In practice, what does that mean? Does that literally mean that food will stop being produced, that companies can't get staff and therefore they shut down?
I think what happens is people don't shut down, and obviously other people have other views on this. There are a lot of people who are perhaps eking their way through wanting to maybe retire and coming back as consultants in some areas, but there are other areas where people, I mean, for example, at this time of the year, I start getting phone calls, as most universities I imagine do with food science related courses, people that know me, and then people who want to engage with our careers service to post adverts. And there's a flurry that comes through relating to food sector, in retail, in manufacturing, in R&D, ingredients, technology, sensory science. It's phenomenal. We haven't got enough graduates to fill those posts. So every year those posts are not filled. And perhaps other people get the jobs through sort of, working through dead man's shoes and various other things. But the innovation and the innovation in thought and the innovation in doing is being sort of almost sapped away by the fact there's no new talent going in there. I mean, some of the bigger companies have said to me over the years that that they would take another 3 if they could, but they just haven't got the ability to take on people for that graduate scheme, or not enough applications were put forward to that particular one role. It's sapping innovation, and actually, as in the UK, we've left the European Union. We need to be even more independent in our thought, indeed, and therefore we need to be innovating. And part of that is not just making sexy, brilliant food, which I think is wonderful, but it's also making sexy, brilliant food which is good for the health of the nation, and which is using sustainable ingredients and processes. And if we haven't got those people coming through, we might continue making the same thing and not overcoming any of those nutritional or environmental hurdles that we've been given clear briefs to deal with.
Yeah. Okay. Now, Moira, obviously it's not working. There's a lot of new recruits needed. What's the solution? Does the government need to help? Do you need more money? Does everyone just need to work better together, or do you need some big, sexy, hunky,
person to help
worker showing how cool it is? What do you crave when you sit down trying to think how you're going to kickstart this?
Well, I think all of the above, really. I think it's a concerted effort. I think we need to better understand what the food industry is all about and talk about it positively and consistently, and on message as well. I'm based in Scotland, obviously, so I do benefit from government support from the Scottish Government, who support my programme to promote careers in food and drink manufacturing. So I actually get involved at school level, so getting industry people into schools, talking to them about careers in the industry. We've also developed a number of resources as well, trying to make the links between science and potential careers in the industry. But I do think that more is needed. I think we need more consistent support from government. They now recognise how important our industry is. So I think on a UK level, it would be great if we could have support from the industry to put behind really concerted effort to promote careers in food and drink and just show people how important it is. We've actually, to take a positive out of the COVID-19 pandemic, I think there's never been a better time to promote careers in food and drink, because people are so aware of where the food and drink comes from, and it's been so important. This is a time we've got a real opportunity to promote our industry, show how great it is. It's been so resilient, it's really risen to the challenge, and it's actually implemented a lot of the solutions before it was asked to, and had done a brilliant job and should be commended for that. I also think we need some figureheads as well, be they big and hunky or good looking individuals, or very engaging, let's be equal in all of this. I think if they can convey the passion that people, we've already talked about the passion for the industry, and I would say I love working in the industry. It's a relatively small environment, so you tend to know a lot of people, but everyone shares this passion. They tend to really enjoy their jobs. They love talking about what they do. They love the industry. They love the product. So we really need to convey that passion. Also illustrate the kind of careers that you can have and where it can take you. I mean, I just think that's phenomenal. I'm so jealous of some people in their careers that they've had in the industry and the opportunities it's provided them as well. So I think.
But do you think that there needs to be a more fundamental shift? I mean, if companies, and I know that a lot of companies do care about their corporate responsibilities a lot, but if that was a bigger deal, would we draw more people into the food industry because they kind of think this is a decent thing to do, and that if it was seen as a more positive industry on an ecological level, on a poverty tackling level, then the people whose desires are shifting now that they realize they're never going to earn enough money to get a mortgage on a house, might as well do something good for the world. Do you think that will shift their perception, so they might think, okay, maybe this is a decent industry? But that's going to take a shift, really, isn't it?
Oh, it was going to say, well, I don't think it will, actually, because when you find out, when you go into the industry and you find out what they're doing and how they're trying to tackle a lot of these issues, they're actually doing some phenomenal stuff.
Do you know what? You're absolutely right. So maybe they're just not communicating it enough.
Yeah, I think that's.
It's seen as the sort of the company to beat on the head, but they do a phenomenal amount of positive work as well.
I think there's maybe a slight fear factor with some of the companies, in that if they put their heads above the parapets, because sometimes in the past they've maybe been bashed for, say, producing an unhealthy product, or using the wrong kind of ingredients, or for whatever. They've taken a lot of sticks sometimes in the past, so they maybe don't want to take that step. But actually, what the industry has done over the past few years and how it's turned itself around, and what it's really doing to tackle the environmental challenges that we're facing at the moment is phenomenal. And you're right, I think what we've established with young people is if they have an engagement with industry, that makes much more of an impact on them, much more of a positive impact on them as well, if it's somebody from industry.
Well, I think there's a big...
Oh, sorry, Emma.
No, by all means, that was you, Rosina. You go next.
Yeah. No, it's just... one of the things I was just going to add was, obviously on our programme, we attract lots of people doing environmental science, for example, and they often come in with that perception of industry being, let's say, it's very easy to chuck rocks at industry, but actually it's so important to see the sector as a system, and actually that system exists to feed people, and it works very efficiently, as we were talking about before. And if we want to see change in it, actually we're better off inside it, the sector.
I know an ecologist who works for an oil company, and
right, so
those two things don't seem to work together, but they do.
Yes. Yeah, and so we spend quite a lot of time really trying to, even if people don't want to go and work for those big names because of what it might look like, on their CV in the future. Obviously, people who are attracted to those kind of degrees, masters, may not see themselves in a big bad food organisation as they might see it. But we do say that there is a real place in somebody's career to have spent some time in in industry, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's retail, FMCG, because it just, the insights that you gain from that part of any of those parts of the supply chain actually support any other future work, and also that sort of nuanced communication that's so important when you want to work across the sector, that many people end up doing as they kind of work their way through their career. So we do encourage it, and people are making those changes. They are thinking, actually, I could go and work for X or Y and make a difference, even if it's not forever. So and sometimes they end up staying for a really, really long time. But I do think it's how the organisations articulate the roles, in that CSR is not positioned in public, CSR, corporate social responsibility, it's not even called that anymore, but it's not positioned in public affairs. It's it's positioned in strategy and within trading, for example. So
it's a big shift, isn't it? So there's also, I think, I mean, Emma, maybe you can answer this. There's a perception that we're talking about massive food companies, but 97% of the food and drink industry in the UK is actually SMEs. Now, obviously, I presume that these are the companies who have less resources to fall back on to advertise how great it is to work in the food industry. But do you think that's an area that more light should be shone on?
I think so, but I think it's a balanced approach, and I think it harks back to the conversation. I totally agree with you. There are a lot of businesses out there who, some larger businesses, like, for example, use a lovely example. They might have bad press occasionally, but they are fantastic, like Nestle, and they'll say, well, you don't have a problem getting hold of graduates. Well, no, you won't, because everyone in the world has heard of you, and therefore every graduate is applying for you on spec, even if they know they're not going to make the next level. But there's so many other jobs out there for graduates within SMEs, and those that go to work for them find them a fantastic part of their overall career pathway, or a permanent part of their career pathway. So I think the thing for me, and I've had this vision for about, how many years, I've said it in a number of places, is that to link the SMEs with the bigger businesses, it needs the welly and the resources and the citizenship, perhaps, of the bigger businesses, seeing the industry as a whole and holistically. With
fighting talk, that is.
Well, I've done it in a few forums over the years, this past couple of years, a lot, and saying that let's work together. And I suppose in my head I have a vision, which, if I could visualise it in one way, would be to say, having social media and TV and other campaigns and website campaigns, which are akin to how maybe 5-10 years ago the army did their recruitment campaigns, where there was a clear perfunct message that went out on behalf of everyone, and these are all the things you could do. Why shouldn't you do it? And then have an associated social media, which is targeted to those people you want to target, which is the right year groups, the right influencers. But it's taken in a cohesive way, because even if we had a couple of big businesses do a few bit better advertising, it's not representing the whole industry. So from retail back to sort of primary processing, we need to have that sort of cohesive thing about. Look, I mean, there are some websites that have that, and obviously Tasty Careers and things like that, but it's not getting in there. It's not getting into people's psyche. They have to go and find it. So how can we get that into a way that is almost subconsciously going into people's psyche as they're watching TV as a family, or as picking up on what they're doing? And I think you're right. The SMEs need to be part of that discussion through local LEPs, like local enterprise forums and things like that, so that they can engage with those messages too. Because actually, some of the more exciting jobs can be with SMEs, certainly in that initial stage. And I've got many graduates who've worked for them, and a good few graduates that are doing very well building their own businesses, and they are now the SMEs.
Yeah, and that's the exciting part of it. And also, Emma, from your point of view as an academic, is it frustrating that you ought to be spending your time teaching the damn stuff, but you're also having to cheerlead about careers? Do you sit there and go, what? Hang on, I'm being pulled every single way, or is that simply how the role of academia has evolved, that you have to be part of the careers side as well?
An academic is a very different academic to perhaps the traditional viewpoint out there, and everyone's got a different balance of what they're doing in university, and my job is predominantly teaching, but my research is about working with industry on shaping teaching to meet what industry wants. So I do a lot of work with industry all the time. So for me, it's bread and butter. Not all academics are on podcasts talking about things like this, but they're doing a different role. So we might have another podcast, and I know the table talks we've done in other areas have been around, for example, protein nutrition, sustainability, or understanding the health of a different demographic of population, aiding populations and how we're dealing with them. So they're actually contributing in a more indirect way by creating inspiring information that hopefully gets people more excited.
Yeah, so the public engagement issue is really important for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just to chip in, I mean, me and Emma have spoken in the past as well, in that the programme that was set up, this IFSTEL programme, is actually a collaboration between 5 universities. And it was designed exactly to do that, to sort out that engagement part that's missing from many of the, I suppose, resource allocations that there are within academia, and the gap that there is between career services and academia. So this teaching programme also has this workplace engagement part to it that is very specific to the food sector and the food system. And one of the things that we've done is, along that journey, which is about 7 years now, is listen to industry about what skills are required, embed that within the teaching of this particular course, but then also bring in industry to talk to our participants about particular roles, their pathways. And I know that Food Matters Careers is starting to do some of those roundtables and really get people to start talking about their journeys, their pathways that aren't always linear. Squiggly pathways are great in food in that respect. And so I think it's important to look at ways that, I'm not just saying IFSTEL, specifically, but ways that institutions can learn from industry or the sector in general, but also vice versa. I think there's a lot more listening that needs to be done, again, in how we shape those advertisements or roles, or what people want and what kind of graduates are coming through.
And I think academia's got and is ideally placed in some respects to set certain tones. So I listen to industry to understand how I can best train my graduates, not only technically to be exploratory thinkers, but also having the right skill set to go work ready, oven ready, as I call it. So oven ready graduates, that's what I produce.
I love a food pun. I love
my oven ready graduates. I got a t-shirt. So I develop oven ready graduates. I work with other universities, and we're sharing the word on this because we're all equally passionate. Even though we're competing, we're not really. So we've got that to do, but as Rosina said, we've also got to listen to industry about any changes, but then we've also got to inform schools about the exciting careers, but then that involves industry again as well. So there's this mutual pathway going backwards and forwards for all of us in our duty of care. And then the central facilities that provide that fulcrum, like the Food and Drink Federation, the Institute of Food Science and Technology, and Food Matters can provide these almost like a grounding points, like sort of pillars that are going down into the ground that people can use as anchor points to say, well, where can I get more information about this? And especially information that's not, for example, University of Nottingham just related. So the framework that I've developed, I did that work over 4 years. I was passionate about it not being just Nottinghamy. So that sits on the Institute of Food Science and Technology website of the graduate pathways. That sits there. Anyone can look at that. It's not in any way feeling that it's anything to do with something which is relating to an East Midlands University. It's relating to anyone. And that's what we've got to do. We've all got to be altruistic about this.
We've got quite a number of resources that we've developed on our website. They're on the FDF Scotland website, and there's a lot of resources that we use in schools there as well. I was just wondering, from the ladies from academia, do you do any work with we do with the universities, particularly in Scotland, that offer the food courses? We do continuing professional development courses for teachers, so getting industry and teachers into maybe a university to give them information about the industry, teach them some experiments that they can then relate in the classroom that link to specific parts of the food industry, to help teachers to use food as a context for learning in the classroom.
I think every university I would speak to would be welcome to do that, and we do some work by the Food Teachers Centre. But the problem we've got is that all the science curriculums are so packed with core information, they don't want anything more. They've got room, so they can only just about get through what they need to for the GCSE without. I mean, I go in and do obviously some sensory talks with various GCSEs. I go and do careers talks in all sorts of places, and when you go in there, it's a finite amount of time they can fit in, and the idea of releasing teachers for training is fantastic. But when you ask them, they say, "Well, I've got nowhere to fit that practical in."
Yeah, and the same actually goes for schools, whether it's primary schools or secondary schools. They, fitting something in, even if it's for free and it's fascinating, they kind of go, "Oh God, you need to try and crack the curriculum." Okay, we have actually run out of time, so I've got one last question for all of you, because we could talk about this for hours and hours, and I hope that you'll all come back and carry on talking to us about this again in the future. But just to end, I'd like each of you to take on board a sector of the population, whether it's kids at primary or secondary or sixth form or university. What would you say to them that might inspire them? that might inspire them? What would you say to somebody to draw them into the food industry? Whether you're going to make it sexy or important or passionate. Why don't we start with you, Moira? And you choose your age group and tell us what you would say.
I would choose secondary school pupils, and I would say come and work in the food and drink industry, because you can be anything you want to be. You can have any kind of career that you want. It'll take you anywhere.
Bold claims. I love that. Yeah, I think that would do it for me. That would do it.
Don't hold me to it though in the future.
You made a promise there. You got to follow through with that. Okay, Rosina, which age group would you choose, and what would you like to say?
Well, I'm actually going to plug something. It's not my. I'm a trustee for TasteEd, which is the
thing. Go for it.
Food education charity that B. Wilson has co-founded, and it's very much directed at Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2 kids, and it's very much just about experiencing food on a sensory level. And I think that culturally, I'm half Italian, so I know how culturally food runs, in my family's veins, but really that food is life. And this COVID crisis has really shone a light on that as a concept, that without flour, people do go into a bit of a tiz, and these things that we have taken for granted. So to really build that cultural awareness from a really young age is so important.
That's so good. I like that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And Emma, which age group would you think is your prime target, and what would you say to them?
I would say my prime target is somewhere between 16 and 18, and I would say food industry is vibrant, it's busy, it's diverse, it's rewarding financially and mentally. And if you move into a technical or science role, the world is your oyster. And I would certainly echo previous suggestions that actually it's a global opportunity. Everyone eats. It's a global thing.
Yeah. Well, look, you convinced me. I'm coming in. I'm going to. Oh no, I already am joining you. Okay. Well, thank you so much, everybody, and we look forward to catching up with you again in the future to see how this all evolves. And I have high hopes, especially after a lot more care and importance is placed on the food industry. Now, you've been listening to the Table Talk podcast from Food Matters with Moira Stalker, Rosina Borelli, and Emma Weston, and me, Stephen Gates. If you enjoyed this episode, you might like one of our other podcasts in which we explore pretty much every aspect of the food industry, from salmon farm sustainability to vegetable picking robots. Subscribe to get every episode freshly delivered to you on Apple, Spotify, Google, or your preferred podcasting platform. And to find out more, take a look at foodmatters.co.uk. Goodbye. You've been listening to the Table Talk podcast, brought to you by Food Matters. Subscribe to get every episode freshly delivered on Apple, Spotify, Google, or your preferred podcasting platform. And to find out more, please visit foodmatters.co.uk.